Good evening. It is 5 o'clock and I'm Jim Boucher, Vice President of the school board, Wausau School District Board of Education, and I'm here to welcome you to this evening's talking session. This is the third time that we have met, and we're hoping to again get good conversation and good introduction of some other items that our administrator, Dr. Hiltz, has told me about, so I'm looking forward to seeing that. So with that, I'm going to get out of the way and pass the mic on to Diana White, our PR person here in Wausau.
Thank you, Vice President Boucher, and thank you for being here tonight. I know your time is precious and you're sacrificing time away from other things to be here, and I want you to know that we certainly appreciate that. So tonight's format is really two parts. First, we're going to present to you some information, and then there's going to be opportunity for you to provide feedback, both verbally and then in written form. So that is a little bit of the feedback, and right now what we're going to do is bring forward our superintendent, Dr. Keith Hiltz, who, like I said, will present some information as it relates to facility needs and a scenario of what an elementary school merger could look like. So for that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Hiltz.
Thanks, Diana. All right. I'll echo. Thanks for coming here. I'll hold the mic a little further away so I don't blow your eardrums out. Third community conversation. Some really important topics, and we value your feedback. For those of you who may not have attended the first two, just a quick overview. We've really been having these kinds of conversations for the last few years. COVID kind of interrupted some things, but in 2018 we had a number of listening sessions. From that feedback, we created our strategic plan, and then in 20 and 21, we had a couple of referenda where the solution wasn't what the community was looking for. So we essentially went back to square one. Said, okay, if that's not what the community wants, let's just start over. We'll learn from the listening sessions. We'll learn from the other two referenda, and then we'll go back and see what we can figure out. So we actually took the school board on a tour of a few schools just to help them understand some of the facility needs. We issued that community-wide survey, and so we got a decent response from that. We held some staff listening sessions, and we've already had 2 community listening sessions, this of course being the third. We will hold as many of these as we need to kind of help the board understand the community wishes. And we do have a follow-up staff survey that will help us inform this process as well. So, 2 parts tonight. In our previous listening sessions, the folks who came said, can you tell us more about the facility needs, some more detail, right? What are you going to do? Where do those costs come from? Why is it so expensive? And then the second topic for tonight is, should the district consider merging elementary schools? That question is a little time sensitive. And that's a question that if the board has an interest in merging elementary schools, that would have to be on a referendum because there would be some costs to add on to some schools to make room for the schools we would close, for the students in the schools we would close. So that one is a little time sensitive. If we wanted an April referendum, we would have to have the board approve an actual question by January, and in that question, if we're considering moving school or closing schools, we would have to say which ones. So there's a lot of work that would have to be done. So frankly, if the board says, yes, we're interested in exploring this option, we would probably recommend we wait until November, okay? So anyway, those are the 2 parts. So let's, first, we'll just talk about the facility needs. And this will be, again, high level because there is a lot of information. This was one question we got. How did the district determine those facility needs? We work with a wonderful partner called Nexus. They are engineers and architects, and they did a full study. This is a 50-page document. And in this is a few years old now. But frankly, a lot of the information in there, because it's a facility study, haven't changed much because we've only been able to do a few of the projects. In that study, it includes staff surveys, principal interviews, expert observations, and demographic studies. And that all went into this study. And I'm just going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm going to show you where you can find all this information. So this, for instance, this is a building assessment for John Muir, the building we're standing in right now. And let's see here, right there. Oh, the pointer doesn't work on there very well. Each of these items is a project that needs to be addressed just in this school, okay? And you can see a cost. Those costs are outdated now because we know everything continues to get more expensive. But we have a report like this for every school, actually every building in the district, okay? So that's one piece of information. The second piece is what's called an educational adequacy study. How well does the school serve educational needs? And it's more of a qualitative study, green being really good to go, yellow meaning it works, it's adequate, red means it needs some attention. So again, we have one of these for every school. And I know this is hard to read, so I'm going to show you where you can find this in just a moment. Matter of fact, I'm going to do it right now. I'm going to pull out of this presentation for a moment and take you to our website. So if you've never been here, this is what the home page looks like. If you go to About WSD, lost it a second. Right down here, 2021 facility needs. If you click on that, here is an overview of the facility needs. And then way down here are some possible solutions that we've talked about. And again, it would be presumptuous, easier for me to say, of us to say, this is our project. We're still trying to get some feedback from you. But we do want to show you, this was the referendum that was assembled, or the website that was assembled for last spring's referendum. Each of these photos with the name, that's a link to a detailed list of projects and costs for every school. Show of hands, how many people have seen this part of the website before? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All of our staff, that's good. and Dr. Holdhugh's in here. All right. One of the questions that we've had people ask us, why don't you give us school-specific information? Why can't we hear from the principal? Let me just show you. Let me go down here to John Muir again, since, again, we're here. I'll open up this and you can see a video from the principal who talks about the needs. This is an overview with a map of the work that was going to be done. And down here is that same information that I showed you earlier from the assessment report. That information now is transferred here, so you can see it in a school-specific format. So when people ask, where did those costs come from and how did you know what needed to be done? It was a comprehensive review of all of our facilities that led to each of these projects. Let me pause for a second and see if people have questions first about this information that I've shared so far. Yeah. Thanks for asking. The question was, is this number updated? Nope, this is still from last spring, so these numbers are too low, assuming that all the costs go up over time. Yeah.
Originally, I believe you had a bunch of athletic stuff in there. Is that then still on these pages as well?
Oh, thank you. So, like I said, we have not changed anything from this project. This isn't our new project, right? This is the old one. Many of the things will probably stay, but we haven't removed anything from this.
Okay.
Yeah.
So all the athletic stuff that was proposed in April is still there? All that information is still on there?
So when you say athletic stuff, we had locker rooms, we had some gymnasiums.
We had lights at both high schools?
Yes.
Those kinds of things?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that would still be in there. Not AstroTurf from this project, right. Yeah, mm-hmm. Yep.
Can I interrupt for a second, Keith?
Please.
I get the feeling that some people think this is what's being proposed for April 22. This is not the case, everybody understands. This is an old referendum for perspective building. This is the exact question that happened in 2021. The dollar amounts from 2021, not to be confused with anything that you would help us develop for 2022 or beyond. And that's really important to understand. So sorry for the interruption.
That's fine. If I'm misleading, I certainly don't want to do that. So, and again, what I would encourage, because I think tonight I'm guessing that many of you are here to talk maybe more about the possible merger. And we certainly want to get to that, but we also want to respect the questions that were asked in the previous learning sessions. And what I would encourage people to do is go to this website. You can dig through every school, right? You can watch the videos. There are interviews with teachers. It was a wealth of information. And then if you find something on there that you want to talk more about, you can contact me. And if I can't answer the question, we'll certainly put you in touch with someone who can. All right? Okay, I'm going to go to the second part. We'll talk about the question about merging, and then we'll see where you want to go from there. Oh, thank you, Bob. I'm sorry. Yes. Oh, yes, there's your questions about facility needs. So while Bob helps me out here. So we just finished with that. See if there's any questions. All right, so part 2. Should we merge elementary schools? And people, we got some feedback online and from the last session saying, why are you talking about this again, right? And again, the reason is we went back to square one. We really don't know what led to the no vote for the previous 2 referenda. We've heard all sorts of reasons. So we went right back to the start and said, what do you think? Now, from the survey, we know that the community is split on this question. About 50-50 said yes, we should, or no, we shouldn't. So we thought, let's have a conversation and see where people are at. All right, so here is the way we approach this. There are a number of different scenarios, a number of different plans we could put together. We have a number of elementary schools that are only partially filled. They have some room that we could fill. We have a number of schools that have facility needs. So the way we approach this, instead of talking about a lot of scenarios superficially, we chose one and we did a pretty deep analysis. We asked our friends from Nexus to help us with it. Mr. Tess and Mr. Seiler and Mrs. Gundrum, they looked at staffing, they looked at maintenance costs, they looked at upcoming projects, they took real data and forecasted it forward. And then we looked at it a couple different ways, real staffing and formula-driven staffing. So this is a pretty deep analysis, but very important, the words in red, this is not a proposal, right? We just picked this particular scenario because it is a possible scenario. It would make sense of all the scenarios we could go down. And then we wanted to see what would be the pros and cons, right? So that's where we'll get to now. Oh, the scenario. In this scenario, Rib Mountain, Hewitt, Texas, and Lincoln would be merged with other schools, obviously those around them, right? We did a lot of work on which students, but that's not really the heart of the question tonight. So we didn't bring that information. We certainly have it. Also in this scenario, the Montessori school would be moved to Rib Mountain Elementary. And let me just speak about that for a moment. It adds some complexity to the question, but we didn't want to avoid it. The Montessori board, and frankly, we think that the Montessori school would be better served in its own space, but we do have another plan where we could do an addition onto Horace Mann, and Montessori would have their space there as well. But we wanted to bring this up, again, full transparency. So that's the scenario that we examined. Did you want to speak to this, Bob? Mr. Test put together a nice graphic of, oh, you got that one?
I'll take both, the
right, you
clicker
want to?
and,
Okay, there you go.
all right,
Oh, I thought you wanted
perfect.
both
I'm gonna
blanks.
need the clicker, that's for sure. We did an analysis of how much could be saved or some additional costs also with the closures or mergers that you saw on the previous screen. And some of this might surprise you, but we start off with, these wouldn't sequentially happen necessarily in this order. You wouldn't sell any buildings before you have new ones built, but they seem to make sense. A person could quickly say, you will no longer need these 3 buildings, so let's sell them. So if we take the money we capture from selling the buildings and the one-time costs in technology and some capital improvements over the next 10 years, you'd save about $3.25 million. From there, your referendum could be $15 million less because you wouldn't need improvements at Hewitt, Texas, Lincoln, or Rib Mountain. So another $15 million in savings from there. But at the same time, you would have to add on to a few buildings for the added enrollment from the displaced students that come from the closed buildings. So you'd have to add on to, let's say, South Mountain, perhaps Grant, maybe Hawthorne Hills, Riverview. Some of those schools that are adjacent to the closed schools, you would have to add on to. So now you're adding $10 million back. And then furthermore, like Dr. Hiltz mentioned, your timeline gets extended a little bit further. We don't make a decision like this and go to referendum in April and start building next fall. You've got another year of exposure to inflation, and that would be about 5% on the entire project because the entire project would be delayed another year, $8.6 million. So after you net all of these out, it comes to about a $350,000 larger referendum price tag. Now, what would happen in the next referendum 15 years from now? You could speculate you'd have fewer buildings that you'd have to maintain and make capital improvements to and things like this. This is just for this next referendum. Dr. Hiltz has a slide next where he talks about one-time operational savings. It's not what we're talking about here. These are capital investments, one-time operational savings. I'll leave for you, and that has to do with staffing for the most part.
Sure, thank
Any
you.
questions on this slide?
Right, let's take questions on this first, because this might surprise some people. Yeah, Mark?
You just mentioned you would be closing 3 schools, but then was this including keeping, not South Mountain, Rib Mountain for Montessori or not? Because it seemed like there was a bit of a conflict.
Keeping Rib Mountain.
So this is only
Yeah.
getting rid of 2 schools?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, along those lines. So, yeah, so the question is, if we remodeled Rib Mountain for a Montessori, is that cost included here? The cost of the addition at Horace Mann is roughly similar to the cost to remodel Rib Mountain. We're trying to keep this as simple as possible, but you asked these really good questions, so we just decided to not really address that cost here because they're almost cancel each other out.
I don't know if this is the right time to bring this up or not, but you mentioned you weren't sure why some people voted against the referendum for the school closing. And I know there was a group that very firmly did not feel that from a racial standpoint, you should be changing that. So do any of these address the issue that came up last time, which it doesn't look like it is, although I'm not sure who they were going to merge with on the plan.
Yeah, so I'll tell you that when we were doing this scenario, I went to Lincoln School, which is included in one of the scenarios, and that was one of the questions they asked me. They said, why is it Lincoln? Right? Why does the plan almost always seem to include Lincoln? And frankly, it's just geography. We have 3 elementary schools that are near each other, and none of them are full, and so that's really the reason. Lincoln's in the middle. Jones has a 4K academy, and Grant is now a historical building, right? So the concern from two referenda ago, when we proposed to close Lincoln and merge with Grant, was the fact that, one, we weren't able to engage that community to really have a conversation, and it is one of our neediest populations. So now, really, for financial reasons and others that I want to talk about in a moment in terms of staffing and student programming, we've expanded it to multiple schools that address really all facets of the demographics of our student body.
So did they accept that as an explanation, or were they satisfied with that, or not?
I believe so, in the conversations we've had, yeah. But, you know, that's and we haven't had a community conversation with that group yet. Again, this is just a scenario. So, and part of the reason that this would take longer is if the board says, yes, we're interested in merging schools, we would want to go have those conversations. We would also have to make sure that this is the scenario, because again, that referendum question would have to specify which schools would be closed.
And so would Lincoln merge with Grant?
Question was, would Lincoln merge with Grant? And again, it would probably be split, but again, we don't want to get so much into who would go where as to what are the pros and cons, which we haven't even gotten to yet. How about if I wrap this up just for a minute, and then we can take some more questions about this. Oh, thank you. There you go. So let me just again address the reason for the extra year. If the board decides we want to go to a referendum this April, and if it is successful, then over the summer and fall, this coming summer and fall, we would develop the plans. To develop the actual plans, to get architectural and engineering drawings and the costs and all that, and get bid papers ready to go is a huge task. Very expensive. So we don't do that until the community says, yes, this is the plan. So we need a significant amount of time. We also have to engage with the staff to make sure that we get some input. So over the summer and the fall of '22, the plans will be developed. Bids go out about this time of year, frankly, early winter. And then we wouldn't start any projects really till spring of '23. That's with a successful referendum this spring. If the board says we're interested in merging elementaries, now we have to go out and engage the communities and the staffs. We have to do more analysis. We have to develop the real project. We can't get that done by December of this year in time for the referendum question to be approved. So that means we have to move to November. That means the plans get pushed back until they don't get bid until '24. So that's another year of waiting. And as someone said to me, doing nothing costs us, right? It's another year of inflation. You saw it's in that $8+ million every year that the costs for this project increase. So that's the reason that we would have an extra year. That's why the timeline changes. Questions about the timeline? Yes, sir. Oh.
Question's not about the timeline. I think that's a little optimistic, some of those dates, because number one, I don't think there's a lot of contractors out there right now looking for work. But my real thought wave on merging elementary schools, any elementary schools within the system, I can only think of one right now, is what's going to be the psychic of the voters when they lose their neighborhood schools? And there's going to be 3, 4, 2, 5, I don't know how many,
Yep.
But what's going to be the psychic of those neighborhood schools?
Depends, right? But that's the next slide. So thank you for asking that question. When we think about the pros and cons of merging elementaries, this is roughly where we end up. Did I skip a slide? Okay, good. All right. So on the pro side, there is a savings for recurring funds. As you can imagine, if we had 3 fewer schools, we would have facility costs that we wouldn't be paying, and we would be able to reduce staff over time. That comes out in this particular scenario to about $1.25 million per year. That's recurring. Also, a major driver in this is interest among staffing. Again, those listening sessions I referenced in the first slide, one of the things we hear from a number of our staff in these smaller elementaries is many of them have to be part-time and split between schools. And so that it's a difficult working arrangement. And so we get quite a bit of turnover because of that. They don't really have a home base. And so we would be able to have consistent encore teams with art, music, phy-ed, things like that. I wanted to make sure I noted that in larger schools, the class sizes are not larger. We have board guidelines that dictate class size. So class sizes would be the same, relatively the same, and more consistent. And I'll tell you, just because we have Hewitt, Texas in this scenario, I was out there just the other day, and we have some very small class sizes. We have some very larger class sizes, just because of the economy of scale of a school the size of Hewitt. Now, I want to say this too. I love little schools, right? I was out there. They actually had 4 staff missing that day, and they all banded together and they made it work, right? They were very, very flexible. They shared students. They did whatever they needed to do to make it work. So this is nothing against the school. This is nothing against the community. This is a conversation, right? A community and staff conversation about whether this is what we want to do, what we need to do, right? For the health and well-being of the district, of the community, of the students and the staff. So I just wanted to add that caveat. Lastly, there are, with larger schools, there are some more possibilities for student support and programming. I was talking to our education team the last couple of weeks, and they were able to rattle off a number of possible supports for students. So that's on the pro side. On the con side, as you just saw, there's limited, if any, one-time savings, dollar-wise, at least at this time. Right? Because we have to do some additions. Another con, we would be rearranging students and staff. There could be some longer busing times, but again, once you redraw lines, you have to redo routes. Hard to say, but we want to be aware of that. It would change the culture of existing schools, right? A school of 300 or 400 students does feel different than a school of 100 or 200. Although I would note that where I came from in Ashland, my previous district, we had a 6 or 7 section elementary school, 6 or 7 classes per grade level. And because, again, of the caring nature and the structure of that school, it felt very welcoming and small. So large schools don't have to feel large. And lastly, I think this is where you were kind of going, is that emotional impact, right? People are attached to their schools. And so there is that emotional impact of closing schools. So that's where we kind of ended up with the pros and cons. And I'd like to pause there because I think this is kind of getting now to the heart of the matter. And I'd like to hear from some folks if you're willing to share.
Dr. Hiltz, this gentleman has a question right here.
I would like to see the hands of the school board members that are here tonight. We got more hands than we got school board members.
We have 9 board members.
We have what?
9 school board members.
9 more members. Okay. I thought we were here to discuss the merging of the high schools.
Elementary at this time. The high schools, if that would be a later conversation. The first question we have to ask the board to tell us is, are they interested in merging elementary schools? Sir.
Other one over here.
Referenced up here is the consistent class sizes and the guidelines. Just for clarification, can you tell us what the min and max are for the elementary classrooms?
There isn't really a min, just a max. It's kind of, again, a guideline. Let's see, K2, 25. Okay. Yep. 27 in grades 2 and 3.
And 29, 4, 5.
And 29 students in grades 4 and 5. You tested me there, yeah.
I'm going to ask then, in some of these schools, how low are we currently in some of these classrooms?
I'm going to look at Tabitha and see if you know.
The smallest class size that we have right now, I believe, is 9 students. We have several that are between 9 and 15. But in most of our buildings, the averages are closer towards 25 and sometimes a little higher.
Thank you.
Important also to mention that AGR numbers are smaller, right? AGR schools have much smaller enrollments, and we get funding that comes along with that.
Yeah, AGR stands for Achievement Gap Reduction. Those are contracts we have that as Mr. Test mentioned, we get extra funding. Those contracts are for higher poverty schools.
And those class sections K through 3 are capped at 18, but at 4 and 5, the caps are 29, just like at the other buildings. So it's just a K3 reduction.
Thank you.
And Lincoln is the only AGR school?
No, we have several.
Well, I mean in this
Yes, in this proposal. Mhm. Over here, good, Jane.
I just want to say that we have declining enrollment, and you see how long the time takes to get anything done. So we have to be proactive. If we wait until we really need to move to smaller schools, we have a 2 or 3 year wait. So it's best to get ahead of that snowball.
Thank you.
So which schools have those smallest class sizes that are not part of special programming? Is it Hewitt, Texas, or is it Lincoln?
Sorry, Dr. Girl. Are you talking about the small class sizes that are not AGR?
Correct.
Yeah. Hewitt, Texas? Anybody else?
Doctor, sorry. I'm Tammy Steckbauer, the principal at Rib Mountain. I can tell you what our current class sizes are right now. We have 15 and 16 in kindergarten, 13 and 13 in first grade, 16 and 17 in second grade, 23 and 22 in third, one section of fourth at 26, and in fifth grade we have 22 and 22.
Thank you.
I think to add to that clarification, so part of why we end up with small class sizes like that is because at, for example, second and third grade, our cap is 25. Well, if we have 26 students in only 2 sections, we've now created 2 sections of 13, versus if we had the ability to have a third section, we could go with more students, you can distribute them differently. And so I think because of the limitations with a 2-section school, the minute we go over that maximum, it creates by default very small class sizes when we have to split them out.
Right, yeah, and that was the note about more consistent class sizes up there. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd just like to ask a question. Could you expand more on, if we don't do any of this, I think some of the confusion in the community is, what are we in for? If we continue to have small class sizes, which honestly from a parent, it doesn't sound bad to me. It doesn't sound bad to have a small class size or a small school. So I think in the long term as a community, what does that mean for us? If we decide, yes, we want a ton of small neighborhood schools, we don't care if there's small classes, I think it kind of comes down to numbers and saying, this is what you're going to pay for in the long run, and how does that compare to merging now? Does it mean eventually, yes, we will be paying for a bunch of empty schools? So could you expand on that a little bit?
I can. It's a really good question. I guess the reason we created this scenario was try to start to answer that question. So financially, we can kind of see, a little over 1.25 million. What would happen, and Mrs. Roosh mentioned this too, in a declining enrollment situation, right, which is what we're in. And it's not drastic, right? This is a slow decline. eventually you will get to what you said earlier, higher costs. That's really it. Right now, we have higher than average, staffing costs and facility costs that really are due to our structure, our large number of small elementary schools. Being more efficient, again, frees up some funds for whether it's, compensating staff or investing in programs. It also improves the staffing situation for the people who are part-time or split between schools. And again, some of the support. So we haven't done an analysis that would say, we would save X number of dollars if we did this. If the board is interested, we could do that. That would be a large study. I don't know how to do it, but I think we could put our minds together and come up with a process.
And part of my response to your question as well is it sounds wonderful for those small class sizes, and it's wonderful to teach in those small class sizes, but I have colleagues. I teach in one of the AGR schools and quite frankly love what I'm doing until I would get to 4th grade or 5th grade. And it's really a struggle for some staff members to feel good about coming to work when they're sitting with 26, 29, and they have somebody with class size of 13. So it's just putting a divide where it doesn't need to be. And also it comes down to nobody wants the changes in their school. Everybody wants it. It's okay if it's with somebody else. So I feel desperately bad for Lincoln, and even the fact that they're hearing Lincoln, Rib Mountain, and the changes, nobody wants them at their own building. But in the long run, we have to hold on to staff as well, and it's a very unique time for teachers, for recruiting teachers. We have to set ourselves apart in Wausau, and I think many people think in the community who voted no, think that we're always trying to spend money, and I can't even explain how much we're doing with less. I'm quite an experienced, AKA old teacher, and I'm on my way out, and it's scaring me. It's scaring me to leave. My daughter is a senior, and my oldest is 23. They all went through from K on, and we weren't in the tiny class sizes, but you live with where you choose to live, and it's very, very hard for me to hear so many negative things about any time we're trying to move forward. We're going to bring people to Wausau if we have good schools. That's just the way it is. If the schools go down, the economy is not going to be pushing forward, in my opinion. And again, I'm just a teacher. But I just have to say that's why it's a big deal, because some kids are sitting with 29 and some are not. And so the teachers, as well as the kids, are suffering in those situations.
Thank you.
Hi, I just have a question about the Rib Mountain and South Mountain. So I'm just watching South Mountain grow. I mean, the Rib Mountain area is growing rapidly out there with development. Has that been looked at in terms of what they're thinking in terms of kids coming in? Because if we put Rib Mountain over at South Mountain, plus we have that huge development, I'm just wondering what thoughts are on that.
Sure, yeah. In one scenario, we could merge Rib and South, but South was built to be added onto. And so, yes, that the demographic study projected enrollment, and so we would build to meet those projections.
I love the comments from the teacher, and teachers should count and haven't counted enough, so thank you. I agree that not everyone needs, classes of 12 or 13, but classes of 29, I mean, there's more than enough evidence to show that even though the limit can be 29, we shouldn't be shooting for 29, and we really should, regardless of what plan gets taken, we really need to get those classes in the low 20s, I think probably is ideal. Are you elementary? Yeah. And would you agree with that, that in the low 20s, around 20? Because 29, I mean, my gosh, you have kids who have special personalities or needs. I mean, you can't do it with 29. I'd like to have everyone substitute one day, and I think you'll learn that it's hard.
Everybody's mentioned so one of the things that was brought up is when you have a small school, one section school, you sometimes end up with real small classes, which is kind of nice. But you also sometimes end up with real large classes for that same reason. So when the listing of a pro is a consistent class size, it's easier to avoid class sizes of 29 when you've got 3 or 4 sections to distribute evenly than it is when you have one section at one school, 2 sections at another school, and 2 sections at this school. That's where you're more likely to have 13 at this school, 29 at that school. So there's good and bad with that small school. You can sometimes get lucky and be in the small class, but you can other times be in the real large class. And I think also what this gentleman mentioned about neighborhood schools, I think that most people, when they vote, if it's their neighborhood school, if it's their child's school that is being impacted, they're not going to think much, I wouldn't have, they're not going to think much about $1 million or $1.25 million a year and what difference that'll make for the next 30 years. As a board, we think about that sort of thing, and I think other voters will, but voters whose child is in that school probably won't think about that. So the only way that the voters whose child's school is impacted are going to vote in favor of it is if they also understand some of the benefits of a larger school. If they only think it's a negative, they're going to vote no. And that was one of the problems we had 2 referendums ago, is it was described as a negative, described as you're doing A, B, and C to a community. There was even, we received a letter or an email from the Hmong American Center asking us why we were increasing the class sizes for our minority population. We weren't. The class sizes weren't increasing. The same number of teachers were going to teach the same number of students, so the class sizes weren't increasing, but that information was out there. And there wasn't enough opportunity to get the accurate information out. Now, even if getting the accurate, you could get all the accurate information out, it still might not work. But I think that's another reason why it would probably take that longer time frame if we were to go that route, because getting information out about closing and combining schools is a much bigger task than getting information about, hey, wouldn't it be nice to have a new roof and have a new playground and not have your cafeteria and gym in the same space? I mean, that you don't need to have 10 community meetings with your school about that.
Thank you.
Thank you. First of all, Sandy, thank you so much for sharing kind of a teacher perspective, because I think it's really important that the community understands that the inconsistent class sizes are very difficult on our staff and can create a lot of divide that way. So I really appreciate you saying that. And then I guess my question, much like what Jane shared, and I really appreciate and agree with, is that I want to know if we don't move in the direction of merging, are we just kicking the can down the road? Because eventually that's what we're going to have to do anyway, and we're just putting off an inevitable and obviously spending an extra 1.2 million each year and, you know, waiting. And I'm wondering how much longer, if anyone has a prediction, what does that look like?
I haven't looked at those projections that closely. I don't know, Bob, if you've looked at that study in a while.
The enrollment projections?
Right.
I have, and we were tracking pretty well until last year. And then all of our enrollment projections models got kind of thrown into a tailspin. So it's anybody's guess what's happening with enrollment over the next 5 years. But if enrollment did continue to decline, which it is for probably 80% of the school districts in Wisconsin right now, probably America, right? If it continues to decline, could you eventually find yourself in a position to consolidate some elementary schools with board action and not necessarily a referendum? If 2 schools that were adjacent to each other were both 2/3 full, for example, and one small one, one large one, you could put them together with board action. I I mean, that could happen. In the analysis is a lot of things. One thing that's not in the analysis, I mentioned it earlier, is 15 years from now, could there be a referendum where you're trying to make improvements to X number of schools rather than X minus 3? I mean, that's real, but we didn't try to project what's happening 15 years from now. I don't know if that answered your question, but the enrollment trend is declining, and how long does that continue?
I have a point of clarification to make sure that facts are out there, because I do want to make sure that we don't get misinformation out there. When asked about the maximum class size, and we had said 29 at grades 4 and 5, I want people to understand we have that occurring in only one grade level at one building. In 4th and 5th grade, which are the 2 grades where 29 is the maximum, the average class size as of today in 4th grade is 19.2. The average class size in 5th grade is 21.5. So on an average, we're not anywhere close to the maximums. However, we do have one grade level at one building that is. That building happens to be one that, with this scenario specifically, they would be gaining some additional students, which would break that section out into 4 instead of 3 sections, and those class sizes would go down, which would be exactly what we would be hoping for. It gets us back to having more typical and steady class sizes across the district.
Thank you, Tabitha.
The Montessori situation, is that mandated by public statute to be supported financially by the taxpayers?
Yes, it's one of our schools.
I guess the question then, the only thing that hits my mind right away in the back of it, why are we calling it a Montessori school when we could maybe save some money? I don't know, and just put those kids in regular, I'll say, what, 1 through 8 or whatever it is? I don't know what it is now today. But I have a hard time with the district going back to the taxpayer and saying, hey, we need Montessori, we need charter, and there could be a couple other acronyms there I don't even know nowadays. When I go back, we just had one kind of high school for everybody that went there. And that was 55, 57 years ago. I don't understand why we're trying to cater to, in essence, fewer at maybe not the benefit of the larger group.
Well, that's an interesting question, and I would let you, a couple of thoughts come to mind. We've learned a lot about learning in the last 50 years. And part of what we've learned is that a number of students learn a lot better if they are able to, build things, have some more choice in how they learn or how they demonstrate their learning. And Montessori is a model that gives students a lot more authority over their own learning, and a number of students do very well in that. So in our efforts to try and meet the wide variety of learning needs, that's why we offer the Montessori. Yeah, thank you.
Might. Also, early on in the life of a charter, there's a lot of charter money that comes with that. There's grant funds from the state that come along with development of a charter school, any charter school. And then once that charter school is developed, it also is an attractor for school students outside the school district. If we can attract students from outside the school district because we have a couple of different varieties of charter schools, Montessori being one of them, that attracts open enrollment. With that is revenue.
Hi. I would just like to say, as someone that has now fought twice to keep Lincoln open, I am not opposed to the idea of, as Lance has been talking about for years now, with the model school where you have more resources, all the pros, I don't need to go through them. But what it needs to be, in my opinion, is it needs to be a district-wide push, not a push on one school at a time. And what I fear will happen, and my biggest fear in this whole process, is the board is going to hear a lot of pushback from, let's say, 2 schools, but not a 3rd school. So the board will think to themselves, oh, well, we'll just do it to the 1 school again, and then that 1 school will all of a sudden start speaking up again, and you'll be in the same situation you were in a year ago with the proposal, 2 proposals ago. So I just really encourage the board that if you do move forward with this, don't do it on the backs of the most needy students in the district. It needs to be a district-wide and all elementary schools. It needs to be a full district-wide solution to the problem, not a solution based on 1 or 2 schools in the center of the city.
Yeah, I just, so far for what I'm hearing now, and I'm sure we'll have more discussions about it, it makes sense to me also that if and when this ever happens, whether it's now or 10 years from now, it would make sense to have it happen with more than just 1 school. However, if the communities describe it as you just did, as doing it to the school and doing it to that community as opposed to doing it for that community, it fails. So the only way the referendum passes is if the community believes that it's a benefit for the community, that the brand new building is a benefit for those students, that the larger school with the extra support in terms of a full-time counselor is a benefit, that having the art teacher there every day is a benefit to the school. So if they think that it's being done to them, it's going to fail, whether it's 1 school or 4 schools. If we have 4 schools thinking that something's being done to them, the referendum fails.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Well, maybe Lance and I should talk.
You 2 could have a debate and we
No, I just want to say that I hear what you're saying and I agree with what you're saying, but as the school that is always in, as a, well, I guess now former parent of a school that's always in the conversation, it does feel like it's being done to us when our children are now going to go from a school of 250 to a school of 450 when there's a school of 110 across town that now, because of the last referendum that passed, does have their own school counselor, their own school psychologist, and all of those things that we passed in April of this year. So the benefit seems to be less and less the more we move forward. So I just, again, think it needs to be a kind of whole student body problem and not just problem here and there. It needs to fix across the system.
I wonder, I'm just looking at time and I'm wondering, Diana, everybody's had a chance to hear some questions, some comments. I wonder if we should invite them to do the written feedback as well, because we want to make sure we get everybody's voice, and we know in a group this size we can't necessarily do that. But Mr. Creasy, did you want to?
I was just going to say I appreciate the feedback, and I guess I'm curious, if you have other thoughts and ideas, and obviously we don't have probably enough time to get into it here, but if you have different ideas as to what the scenario should, look like, I think from a logistics standpoint, it's like Keith mentioned, you have schools that are within a 1 mile radius, we can hit, 3 schools. And so, I think the scenario that was presented, that is presented, something along those lines, I'm just curious and we don't have to get into it tonight, and be happy to talk to you, afterwards.
Well, just, as I said, I'm not on the surface opposed to this. What I fear is going to happen is you'll get a lot of pushback from these schools that have not been repeatedly tried to be closed before. You'll say to yourself, oh, well, we'll keep those 2 open and then still close this other one. At which point, it's just gonna, because if you remember, right as the pandemic went down, there was, as I've talked with Keith numerous times, there was this plan A, where it's like we were gonna have a 5-6 and a 6-7 school, and we were gonna close 4 different elementaries. There was this huge thing. You didn't hear bunk from me about that. I am not opposed to this. we need to do this equitably across the district. You can't have a school of 600 and a school of 120. It is not equitable to those students in either school. So it can't be, if you're going to do it, it needs to be a comprehensive plan that unfortunately or fortunately affects the entire community.
Happen? I mean, you're talking Lincoln has how many students in it, and that would disperse to a couple different schools.
Correct.
You would not turn in, it would not turn into schools that are 600 plus, I'm just,
Yeah,
Yeah.
right around 4, but yes. Mhm.
and what's our largest?
Yeah. Got it.
First time I went through this, when Julie was the principal, they were proposing a school of 500 and some students. At the same time, they were going to, I think they were closing both Grant and Lincoln and going to completely rebuild Jefferson into a 550 person school. I don't remember the exact numbers, please don't quote me on the, well, I guess I'm on recording, so. You can go look at it. This was what, 2013, something like that? And that was the proposal, at which time there was still a school, Hewitt, Texas, of 115 or however many students are there. That is not an equitable distribution of the students around the district. And I fear, and what I'm trying to avoid, is that happening as we get picked at from different interest groups around the district, and everybody has their pet project, and then lo and behold, oh, there's Lincoln getting shut down all by itself again.
All right. Diana, do you want to give some direction on the written
Yes.
feedback?
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for your questions and your input. What I'd like to do now is when you walked in the door, you got a green half sheet of paper with 3 questions on there. I'd like to take just the next few minutes and have you take some time to fill those out. And then before you leave tonight, we'll collect those. So why don't we take the next few minutes to fill those out?
Yep. And just so you know, we've been reading the written feedback from the other meetings, and that's kind of what informed what we shared tonight, as well as the verbal. So again, we welcome feedback, pro, con, just want to know what people are thinking. We're all smarter together, so thank you.
And one quick note, if, in the middle of the night or early tomorrow, you think to yourself, oh goodness, I forgot to write that down. On that same web page we showed you under about WSD, the 2021 facility needs, if you click on there and scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a feedback form on there that we'll get instantly. So like I said, if something comes up, don't be afraid to reach out to us there.
Right here, right? Yep, here it is. Yeah, so just so you know where that form is, so I had brought you to the facility needs page, if you saw that earlier, right here. So if you scroll all the way to the bottom, past the needs, past the possible solutions, past last year's site, there is a place you can add some more feedback in writing. So thank you. Who's going to collect those sheets, Diana?
I can go over by the auditorium doors and collect those.
All right. Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Well, again, thank you for coming. Based on this feedback, we're going to have a conversation with the board on December 13th is our next meeting, and we will share all this feedback with them, and we'll start to have some more concrete conversations about direction, particularly with the elementaries, and about referendum more in general. So thank you for being here tonight. We look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good evening.